Back in 1981, TSR dropped one of the most iconic D&D monster manuals of the game's history to date. It was called The Fiend Folio, and it was awesome. This was the book that brought us mainstays in the D&D collective consciousness like the Gith, who were featured prominently on the book's cover. They might look a little different these days, but without this, we don't get Lae'zel, so be more appreciative. Now, this isn't new information for many of you, I'm sure, but something that a lot of people, especially in Canada and the United States, don't know is that the vast majority of these creatures were already taking on adventuring parties at the game table in the United Kingdom. Across the sea on the Isle of Britannia, there was a bi-monthly tabletop magazine that was all the rage. It was called White Dwarf, and it was more or less the British version of Dragon Magazine, but was not focused entirely on Dungeons and Dragons and included articles about other games like Traveller. White Dwarf was published by a little company called Games Workshop, mostly known in current year as the behemoth of a company behind Warhammer, but back then were simply finding their footing as a games publisher in the TTRPG scene's infancy. And starting in issue 6, White Dwarf would begin including a column titled The Fiend Factory. These columns were like mini monster manuals that would provide you with a handful of new creatures for use with D&D, the majority of which were submitted by readers and edited by the column's editor, Don Turnbull. And if your monster was chosen for publication, you would receive the next issue of White Dwarf for free. But the promise of a free magazine was really just a little bonus for a bunch of fledgling game designers and homebrewers who wanted to see their creations on the big stage, so to speak. This went on for a while, and eventually the concept of the Fiend Folio was born. It would be a monster manual for D&D with a few new monsters and a few updates of creatures that had only been seen in adventures, but the vast majority of creatures would be entries coming from submissions of White Dwarf's Fiend Factory column. That's right, a bunch of creatures that are considered staples of the game, like the Githyanki, Hook Horrors, Grell, and Shadow Demons, all got their start in White Dwarf. This column is also where Nilbogs are from, and while not exactly a staple creature, the game wouldn't be the same without them. Today's monster, while not nearly as iconic as any of the creatures I just mentioned, is indeed found within the pages of the Fiend Folio, and it did originate in an issue of White Dwarf Magazine, and it has one of the most inconsistent histories I have ever come across when researching a D&D monster. The Susurrus first appeared in issue 9 of White Dwarf, though it wasn't actually part of the Fiend Factory, it was a monster from a dungeon. On page 14 of the fall 1978 issue, we find the Lichway, which is presented as a mini dungeon for 6 to 8 first level adventurers. Ignoring for a moment the fact that writing an adventure, which assumes a group of at least 6 players, is insane, on what f***ing planet is this a mini dungeon? Anything more than 5 rooms in most DMs these days start to get a little squirrely with their prep, let alone 32. I guess really what I should be asking is, on what continent is this a mini dungeon? Clearly British RPG players were just on an ascendant level in the 70s. Just gonna clear a quick 32 room dungeon with 6 to 8 of the lads, crush a point, call it a game night, innit? I'm not gonna give you a tour of the whole place, but this dungeon is more or less a crypt filled with undead, and in room 11 is where we find the Susurrus. The first depiction of this thing presents it as a vaguely humanoid shape, though it has no head, and it seems to be covered in spikes. It's unclear exactly what type of creature this is supposed to be, though it looks like it might be a construct, a weird plant perhaps, maybe some kind of elemental. It's hard to say, and as a creature included in an adventure in the 70s, not much more information is given beyond just what it does. And what it does is claw your face and body with 2 massive arms, impale you on its body spikes, and create an ominous sound akin to the wind blowing through the trees. This sound is made by the creature as it pulls air into its body. All those weird little lattice structures are actually gaps in the creature's body. It is sort of honeycombed with all these openings, and when it pulls in air, it creates a droning song that can be heard for up to a quarter mile away. And this droning, which is referred to in the text as the drone song of the Susurrus, has a bizarre and unique effect on undead. Any undead creature that hears the sound is made to feel at peace, inducing a condition referred to as the sleep of the dead. While under this effect, undead creatures remain entirely inert. Spectral undead just float listlessly in place, and corporeal undead like zombies or skeletons are likely to just lay on the ground or stand in place doing nothing. This song has no effect on living creatures beyond the actual sound itself, and for this reason, susurri are extremely valuable to any organization seeking to keep undead away or in control, hence why the creature is originally found in what is ostensibly a catacomb. It is also worth noting that this original monster entry does refer to these strange ducts as the creature's exoskeleton, implying that there is flesh or something under there. Susurri live by inhaling air, which is why they are constantly emitting this droning sound. It's not clear precisely how the air sustains them, but it is implied that they are able to subsist on the oxygen present in air alone. They hate fire as it burns up oxygen and lowers the local air quality, so if someone happens to be carrying a torch around one of these things, it is going to snuff out the torch and the person carrying it. But aside from that, they're generally pretty chill. They like to hang out in windy areas, just soaking up the air as it passes through their body, and only become violent with creatures who approach them. Though when moved to violence, they are extremely fast for their size and have no qualms about crushing someone with their arms. The Fiend Folio is where most people probably saw this creature for the first time, and their entry here just fleshes out the creature a bit more, but it is generally the same as the original entry in White Dwarf. One thing of note, however, is that their name is actually misspelled in the Fiend Folio. Susurrus is a Latin word originating from the root word susurre, which means to whisper, hence the creature being called that because of their susurrations, which could be considered a type of whisper. In the Fiend Folio, they accidentally threw in an extra S and dropped one of the R's, which is a mistake that was carried forward into 2nd edition when this creature was remade for the monstrous Compendium Fiend Folio Appendix. This version of the Susurrus is definitely the same creature, but it went through a ton of changes. They now have a clearly defined type as a plant, and while the core premise is the same with their droning song and air intake, the creature seems to be comprised of bamboo. Their 2nd edition lore entry also draws a connection between them and the shambling mounds, stating that the susurri are their distant cousins. Because of this, they have lightning immunity and are affected by stuff that affects plants. This entry also expands more of the creature's ecology and explains that they have no brain or vital organs, but rather that they are a decentralized nervous system in a bundle of living matter. This grants them a form of regeneration and guarantees that if slain, they will eventually return to life unless the body itself is entirely destroyed. 2e also makes the drone song a bit more hazardous, as it can put anyone, not just undead, into a slumber. So that's pretty cool, but it wouldn't be the last we heard of the Susurri's droning, because they would return in 3rd edition's Monster Manual 3. Here, their name is finally spelled correctly, and their art has maintained the tradition of going in a completely different direction, not returning to the design of the 1st edition Susurrus, but by fundamentally changing the creature's appearance yet again. They are still headless and are still humanoid-ish, but now they are covered in a mirror-like geometric skin, and they have these strange holes going straight through their body all over. The song now also denies incorporeal undead the benefit of being a ghost when it comes to being hit by mundane weapon attacks, so that's kinda cool. Their creature type also changed to aberration, which is definitely more fitting for this interpretation of the creature, but also, what the f are we doing here? We've seen 3 editions of the game and 3 entirely different interpretations of this creature that have enough in common to definitely still be the same guy, but have also changed drastically from one iteration to the next, and you are not ready for how this creature shows up in 4th edition. In the 4th edition Monster Manual 3, it shows up right here on page 145, except hold on, that doesn't say Susurrus, unless they really blew it on the spelling this time. That says Mirak Nera. Okay, so the Nera are a cast of creatures from the Plane of Mirrors that got their start in 3rd edition, and when they were converted to 4th edition, they didn't reuse the existing 3rd edition Nera art. Instead, they got this piece drawn up, as shown on page 147, and they reused the Susurrus art and just said it was a type of Nera. What do you mean? Listen, I know that art is expensive, and I know you're gonna reuse assets here and there, but you can't just take existing art of a creature from a book you published and put it in a different book and say it's a different guy. It's wild that they thought they would get away with this, especially in a hobby like Dungeons and f***ing Dragons, where you have what I can only describe as profoundly hyperfixated nerds with neurodivergence like myself who spend hours every day looking at this stuff for fun. And that's not even mentioning this. And if you're thinking, that seems to be a giant carnivorous Lolth flesh Wendigo spider emerging from a dark portal, you'd be right. But in a complete reversal of the 4E situation, this is a creature from Shadowdale, the Scouring of the Land, a 3.5 adventure, and it is called the Sussurrus. So anyways, that's the publication lore and history of the Susurrus, which has somehow gone under the radar for many, many years, both in terms of how absolutely bungled it is, and as a genuinely cool and interesting creature, even if nobody working on D&D in an official capacity knows what it's supposed to do, look like, or how its name is spelled. Now, statistically, a few of you watching might remember this creature from a video I made almost exactly 9 years ago. In 2017, I was probably too busy laughing at deep-fried SpongeBob memes to actually make stat blocks for my videos, which I know seems crazy to think about, but I had no idea what I was doing or that this was somehow going to become my job, so I wasn't actually converting the monsters I talked about yet. And that, aside from the fact that I feel like I've learned at least 4 things since then about content creation, is why we are here talking about this creature once more, to do it justice and finally get the Susurrus some 5e game stats. But before I get into the nitty-gritty of what this creature can actually do and how I piece together all of its iterations into a 5e version, I gotta give a massive shout out to this week's sponsor, Heliana and Ryoko's Guide to Mythozoology. This dual book expansion for 5e is funding on Kickstarter right now, and it's gonna be sick. There are a ton of new monsters that look awesome, including multi-phase boss creatures who are more than just monsters, but resources too. That's right, now you can live the monster hunter dream by utilizing a brand new monster part crafting system to create magic items, prosthesis, and even familiars from the monstrosities you slay. And did I mention that there are kaiju? Cause there are, and you can call them to aid you in combat with a new collaborative summoning system. There are over 100 new monsters, including stat blocks that improvise, adapt, and overcome changes to the environment as you fight them. And I know what you're thinking. There's no way that these books contain rules that will allow me to pilot a giant mech suit of armor like the one time they did that in a Doom game, but that's where you're wrong, bucko, because we got a little Neon Genesis in our Monster Hunter too. And if you back before Sunday, March 22nd, you get this dope set of Crystal Myth dice 100% for free. I'm no gamer mathematician, but that seems like a squeal of a deal. So head on over to the Kickstarter page, which is of course linked in the description down below, and check out the playtest material for yourself. There is so much more amazing work on display here that I don't have time to talk about, and they literally crashed the Kickstarter page at launch, so this one's worth your time. So once again, thank you so much to Heliana and Ryoko's Guide to Mythozoology for bringing us here this week to talk about a man full of holes. Speaking of which, let's get back to it. So obviously the first major decision was what type of creature I wanted this thing to be and what I wanted it to look like. Considering the history of this creature, I did the only obvious thing and made them a monstrosity. As for its appearance, this week I was working with Adam, better known online as Atomic Ink, and after I gave him the whole rundown of all the features we needed for the creature to have, I more or less said, go with God and let him take the creative wheel, and this was the result. Now, in terms of actually statting out the Susurrus, there are a few things we obviously need to carry over. The iconic drone song is number 1 on that list, so I made it a trait that affects all undead creatures within 300 feet, forcing them to make a saving throw or be incapacitated until they take damage or are no longer within the area of effect. The DC is only 14, so more powerful undead are likely to pass it fairly easily, but even a lich can roll a natural 1, so it's sure to be hated even by the most powerful undead abominations. I also carried over their ability to detect undead creatures within 300 feet that was present in 3rd edition because that just makes sense, and of course they've got a couple rend attacks which are just your standard smash and claw affair. Their main attack does grapple on a hit, however, which enables their crush bonus action, which is just going to apply more damage to the target that they're hanging on to, in the same vein as the 1E and 2E version's ability to impale its enemies. Rather than have their drone song affect living creatures as well, I gave them a recharge action called Song of Slumber that has a more limited range, but does have the ability to put creatures to sleep, much like the sleep spell. This gives the creature control over whether it wants to put the living into a slumber or not, which I think is a good thing. I also gave it a regeneration trait reminiscent of a troll's regeneratory abilities, which comes from the 2nd edition version of this creature. On account of its decentralized nervous system, this creature is able to withstand a ton of punishment and heal itself for 10 hit points every round. In order to stop the regeneration from functioning, rather than acid or fire like you might use in a control, the Susurrus regen is halted with poison damage. I just like the idea that poison might disrupt their ability to intake air, literally poisoning the air as it passes through their system briefly, which is kind of fun. The other difference here, which is taken straight from 2nd edition, is that when this creature is reduced to 0 hit points, it's not really dead, but its regeneration doesn't heal it back to consciousness either. It just kind of lies there in a heap. If left alone after 3d6 hours, it will rise once more, which is of course subverted by its body being destroyed. Aside from spells like Disintegrate, the idea of whether or not a body is destroyed can be kind of nebulous and is often just up to the DM's discretion, but just to make your life a little easier, I added some language here that makes it less vague. So now when it drops to 0 hit points, it stops regenerating and gains 10 temporary hit points. Because of how temp HP works in the rules, this doesn't actually return the creature to consciousness, but it does give the DM a tangible number to deal with. So if the fighter says, yeah, I hack up the corpse and make sure it's dead, as long as they do 10 damage to the body, they're all good. The final thing you'll find on the monster stat block is a new action called Suffocate. Suffocate is an ability that I came up with and added to the sheet because it wouldn't be a true Susurrus conversion without at least one brand new ability. Suffocate does exactly what you think it does. It forces a constitution save from the target within 30 feet of the Susurrus and does some necrotic damage. If the target fails their save, they also start suffocating. However, this effect only lasts as long as the Susurrus is concentrating on the effect, so if it takes damage and breaks its concentration, the target will be able to breathe again. I think all that makes for a pretty solid CR6 creature that maintains the tradition of evolving stat block design and insane artistic direction, but definitely let me know what you think in the comments. As for how to actually use this thing in a game, there are a lot of ways you can take this. The first thing I think we need to consider is what this creature even is or where it comes from. There is virtually no information about what a Susurrus is, its origin, or where they live beyond the few scraps of implied information here and there throughout the editions. The most concrete lore entry we get is definitely in 2nd edition, where they are plants said to be related to shambling mounds. This version of the Susurrus is just a naturally occurring magic plant guy, and if that's what works for you in your campaign, just do that. I deliberately made the stat block possible to work with any of the chosen designs, so you can just show your players the 2nd edition artwork and run the creature as this weird bamboo monster if you want to. In the 1E lore entry, it is stated that they hate undead, and obviously they have the ability to lull them to sleep, which, why that's true, who can say? If you're going for the plant angle, it could just be a nature versus undeath thing, with the Susurrus sort of being this manifestation of nature's fight against the corrupting forces of undeath. But if you wanted to play them as, say, a construct or a monstrosity, this could easily be a creature that was built or created with magic to deal with undead. I feel like wizards get all the credit for making insane monstrous creatures, but this could be an example of clerics dabbling in the realm of creature creation to induce a monstrosity that hates the undead and has a way to pacify them. But whether they're a monstrosity or a construct, their mere existence implies that at some point they were likely created to deal with the undead, and this would likely have them show up in places like the Lichway in the first adventure. In the mini dungeon where the Susurrus appears, it is locked in a cage within a pretty central location. The 6 to 8 adventurers navigating the hallways to get there can hear this creepy droning sound that gets louder as they approach, and once they find the source, there are obviously a bunch of things that can happen from here. If the Susurrus is slain though, the droning stops, and then all the undead corpses in the dungeon wake up. This is honestly fantastic, and I think it is an awesome way to use this monster, because the creature itself doesn't seem to have any stakes in the grand struggles of good versus evil. I mean, it's got a 7 in intelligence, which is just one teensy step below your average paladin, so it is sentient, but it's not out here holding complex thoughts on morality and its place in the universe necessarily. If it was captured by a religious organization to deal with undead against its will, it's probably gonna be pissed off, even more so if it's trapped in the middle of some abandoned dungeon. So for a tier 1 or 2 party, encountering this thing as the big boss in the final room of the dungeon is great. Just imagine the gang wandering through the creepy halls of ancient stonework, getting closer to this droning sound and wondering why all the rooms up until this point have been so eerily quiet, only for them to slay the monster and then have to fight their way back out through the dungeon, which is now crawling with undead creatures. If you go with the aberration idea, the Susurrus could very easily be a creature that originated on some other plane of existence and somehow found itself on the material plane. Maybe they originate on the plane of air, or even a quasi-elemental plane of air and earth, thus making them elementals, I suppose, but that could be kind of interesting. The first place my brain goes, though, when talking about undead is usually zombies, skeletons, liches, death knights, etc. But a Susurrus could also be an interesting inclusion in a vampire-focused adventure. Maybe something that the players need to do in order to stop a bunch of vampires from taking over a town is to find or even create a Susurrus depending on your origin of choice. If they can force all the vampires to fall asleep anytime they get near the town, bada bing bada boom, the town is mostly safe. At least they've delayed the inevitable, but if nothing else, it could provide them with a leg up on a powerful vampire. If you're running an adventure like Curse of Strahd where the main antagonist is a vampire, simply having a Susurrus in your home base could be a great way to prevent the antagonist from getting all up in your business too. But regardless of all that, this is a textbook example of a central creature designed for an old school dungeon, which is a big part of why it's so interesting, weird, and unique. Taking the Susurrus and adapting it to a situation involving the undead in your game is where this creature really shines, whatever that situation happens to be. And as always, if you do want to use this monster in your game, link in the description down below for free is a Google document which contains all the game information that you will require to successfully run this creature at your table. And over on the Dungeon Dad Patreon, as my way of saying thank you to those of you who throw me a few bucks each month, you can find the high-res PDF version, which is the same game stuff, but it's a little fancier. Speaking of which, thank you so much to our patron of the week, Drex Partis, for your support. It means the most, and thank you so much for watching. As always, if there's a monster from an older edition of D&D or some other role-playing game that you want to see on this show, let me know in the comments or in the Discord server in the Creature Suggestions channel, and you might just see it show up in a future episode. Also, if you're looking for ways to support the channel and you don't want to go to Patreon, or you already are and you're not subscribed for some reason, that would be kind of weird, but please consider dropping a like, subscription, comment, all that stuff helps me out tremendously and lets me keep finding weird little guys from White Dwarf Magazine. It's just White Dwarf. I don't know why I threw an extra dwarf in there, but from White Dwarf Magazine or other weird places, because God knows there's so many weird little guys out there yet to be uncovered. Anyways, that's all I got for you this week. See you in the next one.